Thursday, August 12th, hard to believe we're already here. It's a regular meeting of the school committee. We have just returned from an executive session, and at this time I would invite those who are able and would like to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we do have two members who are not able to be with us tonight, but we will go ahead into our agenda, and we're going to start with public comment. I know we did hear from some people. I know some of you are aware of our policy that we have a 3-minute per person limit, and we keep it to about 15 minutes total. I'm going to ask, I know there are a couple people here who are representing large groups of parents, and I'm going to ask for those, let those people go first for efficiency. And then if there are others who would like to speak as well, to invite them after. So I'm not sure, because I don't know all of you, who the two of the petitions are.
I have one of the petitions.
Okay, so do you want to come on up? Great. And Amanda is going to keep time for us. And then if you could just state your name and where and what street you live on, that would be helpful. Thank you.
My name is Jamie Bronca, and I live on Blackthorn Circle. Thank you, school committee members, Dr. Kavanaugh, and invited speakers. I am a Hopkinton resident and parent to a rising kindergartner and 2 toddlers. I am here on behalf of concerned community members and present the following petition. We, the undersigned, ask that the Hopkinton, Massachusetts School Committee and Superintendent adopt the AAP and CDC recommendations for all students and personnel to wear masks to prevent transmission of coronavirus. We launched our petition on Friday at 5 p.m. on change.org this past week. As of 1 p.m. on Wednesday, we garnered 525 signatures on change.org. We reviewed the 525 signatures and addresses, and as you can see in the courtesy packet we emailed earlier today, and I have 2 hard copies as well, some of the addresses listed are not based in Hopkinton. Some appear to be incorrect address listings and required updating, including my own, which said that I live in Holliston. In due diligence, we reviewed the list and specifically reviewed the non-Hopkinton listed names, 92 in total, in an attempt to verify addresses and correct any addresses requiring corrections or updates. Using public property and address websites and our personal contacts and communications, we were able to verify that 58 of the 92 signatures had Hopkinton addresses. In total, by our count, we can present 491 signatures from individuals with Hopkinton addresses. Since we printed out our list yesterday afternoon, we have continued to collect additional signatures. As of this evening, an additional 27 people have signed our petition since yesterday afternoon. We expect more people will sign in the days to come, and we will update our total signature number and list with you next week. Thank you in advance for your time and attention. Thank you so much for your public service during this critical time in our community.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for coming.
Thanks for coming in.
May I?
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Thank you.
All right, come on up. Thank you.
Just to be clear, this is my own personal statement. So
Okay.
the email that was provided is the group's submission. So
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Chris Melton, 46 Wedgewood Drive, father of a 3rd and 5th grader. For 18 months, our children's lives have been interrupted, while so many things have been taken from them or significantly altered, all while they're most vulnerable from losing social and educational experiences, not from a virus. They face massively greater risk of dying from the seasonal flu than from COVID, and we've never once thought to mask them then. We can look at how European countries withstood the Delta wave even after opening their societies, all while dropping mandatory interventions, including masks. Viruses mutate to survive, that's what they do, but they become less harmful and more treatable, just like influenza. There is no legitimate scientific study that supports the idea that kids should be wearing masks while in school. No admissible data shows that COVID spread is restricted by masks. Monday's Wall Street Journal refers to a North Carolina study that found not a single case of student-to-teacher transmission when 90,000 students were in school maskless. A child's mask is a symbolic security blanket to adults, not for children. How much are we going to alter our lives and behavior to accommodate a singular phobia? It's madness. I've shared with the committee ahead of time a study managed by Brown University from last fall and spring. The study featured schools that mandated masks and schools that gave parents and children a choice, like we advocate for, depending on their own risk assessments. There was no significant dichotomy in cases. In fact, the schools that allowed for mask choice showed less prevalence. Why were these outcomes not reported by mainstream media? Because if it bleeds, it leads, because fear gets ratings. I think we know that by now. We know that cloth is not an effective MPI from various randomized controlled trials, and the FDA specifically states that N95s are not to be put on children. We also know that any reference to a mask study that shows even the slightest efficacy was done in a controlled lab setting, not in room 114 of Hopkins School in the lunchroom or at recess. The physical and sociological impacts of wearing masks as a developing child is flat out damaging. 86% of eligible Hopkinton residents are fully vaccinated, 95% of 12 to 19s are vaccinated, and unvaccinated children are at less risk than a fully vaccinated 40-year-old. The CDC estimates that over 40% of children under 17 have already had COVID. Peer-reviewed studies from Nature and the Cleveland Clinic show immunity and T-cell response from natural infection is higher than with vaccination, including variants. If vaccinating children is the end game, then these kids could be wearing masks for many seasons. Any vaccine in trials with the FDA for under 11s will not be fully approved swiftly due to the near impossibility of demonstrating enough efficacy to justify administering to children who are already nearly at zero risk from this virus. It would have to show virtually zero adverse events in clinical trials. What are we doing to our children? We all watch as they struggle in a world that treats them like moving cesspools of disease while censoring their smiles. More than 200 families now, through today, have signed a letter that we provided ahead of this meeting. There's one group in town that would like to give families a choice, just a choice, and another who would like to force their choice on the rest of our children, healthy or otherwise, while calling our children in their group postings plague rats. This is a Facebook post in their group. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm also representing myself, but I'm part of a group. But my words are for me.
Can you give us your name?
Yes. My name is Jennifer Lips, and I live on Woodview Way in Hopkinton.
Thank you.
First, I wanted to thank you for allowing me to speak before the committee today. I am a research scientist at a local research-based biopharmaceutical company. I am here to show my support for making masking mandatory in schools in Hopkinton. Although I am not a parent, I am an aunt and a taxpayer and a member of this community, which I have come to love. And I have also been a part of the recent international COVID-19 research efforts. Due to my position, I was on a team that helped study the virus and understand its mechanism of action in the beginning of the pandemic. I know that masking up has become a political debate, but as a scientist, this is incredibly troubling. Peer-reviewed studies have shown that masking can reduce the risk of transmission of the virus by more than 70%. These studies are cited on the CDC website and NIH. I can send them to you if you'd like. And despite what the opponents of this mandate are claiming, there are no reputable scientific studies that show that wearing a mask can negatively affect the health of children. In a recent review by the NIH, they reviewed 2 studies done in 2019 and 2020. Done on children wearing face masks, the only 2 studies available due to the recent nature of this pandemic. Neither study was directly related to COVID-19, and although they were very small studies, both concluded that wearing a mask did not affect gas exchange during rest or mild exercise, meaning that children tested could effectively breathe in masks, similar to adults with no effect on overall respiration. I've also heard claims that the masking can negatively affect a child's mental health. While I agree this may be true, and while masking can be a small inconvenience that we've all had to deal with, it's nothing compared to the toll on all of us that over 600,000 people have died of COVID-19 during this tragic pandemic, just in the US. I ask this committee to please follow CDC guidelines and mandate mask wearing in schools, not only to stop the spread of the dangerous Delta variant, which is infecting children and making them very sick, but also to protect our teachers, our nurses, and doctors who we have all lauded as heroes throughout the pandemic, rightly so. The CDC has also come under fire during this pandemic for not moving fast enough or changing mandates as new information was collected or has been called biased. but what the general public may not know, that this is how the scientific process works. We as scientists have hypotheses that could be wrong. We test them, and we continually learn new information which informs our next studies or decisions. And although there have been some missteps from the CDC during this dynamic and tumultuous pandemic, the scientific community trusts and agrees with their guidance, which is why where I work, we've recently reinstituted the mask wearing policy in our labs, and we're also tracking asymptomatic spread of the virus. We have a duty as citizens to protect each other and protect our community, and we can do that with this.
We're at the 3-minute mark. Are
Sorry.
you almost done?
Yeah. Sorry. With this very simple public health measure. I'm deeply worried about allowing the virus to continue to spread in our community, creating the possibility for more variants to arise that are more dangerous. Please consider making this masking mandatory in our schools for the protection of this community that we love so much. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Come on up.
I wasn't planning on saying something, but my name is Mike Norling. I live on Stewart Street, Hopkinton. I'm not sure if it comes across on the TV, but the two speakers that were pro-masks were gasping for air during their presentations. Like, so we have grown adults, and we don't think that that's our kids, and when they're running around in gym that are gasping for air, that's common sense. That masks are bad for kids. There's nothing in the CDC that hasn't gone one way or the other, right? There's nothing consistent. You're a scientist. I'd ask where your funding comes from. Does it come from the NIH or CDC?
So I'm going to
Where-
ask you to just direct
Okay.
comments to us.
So I'd like to know where that information is coming from. If we have someone that's standing on behalf of science, where does their funding come from? Everyone that I've been aware of, we've been looking at this. It's all subterfuge, right? It's say one thing, do another thing. I think we've seen enough in the news. The people that are telling us to do things are the people that are not following those rules. So to subject our kids, I think it's complete nonsense. I used to think teachers were heroes, just like nurses. I work in a hospital setting. I've been completely let down by the teachers, and not only in this town, in all towns. You know, I thought you were there for the kids. When the times get tough, you showed us your true colors, and everyone's hiding in the house. So I don't know if it's teachers' unions, but I would encourage all teachers that feel strongly about anti-masking, step forward. Don't be beholden to the union. You can step out and say and speak your mind. So that's all I have to say, but I'm against masks for children, for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we don't allow back and forth during the public comment period. So I apologize for that. Sorry. Is there anybody else that did not speak that would like to come up on either this or any other school-related matter? Okay.
My name's Sasha Mitchell, and I'm at 35 Cedar Street, and I have 3 children in the schools, entering high school, entering middle school, and entering Hopkins. So my concern about the masks is simply children are learning social cues and social expressions, and with the masks, I think it's incredibly difficult for them to understand emotions and taking social cues. And I also think that, coupled with the mental health situation that we've seen happen the past 18 months, I think is also an issue that we're going to be creating children that are not socially aware and maybe not self-aware. So that's my take on the masks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so last call before I don't move on, if anybody wanted to. Sorry. Thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate taking time out to come and speak to us in person. It's much appreciated. It does matter to us what people think. We've obviously received a lot of email on this as well, and we are taking into consideration what everybody has said, as well as other factors that Dr. Kavanaugh is going to report on tonight. So with that,
Who makes the final decision? Is this the group that's
Yes, the school committee is the ultimate authority on implementing, on voting on any policies across the board. School committee policies, not just limited to masking, but if a masking policy was to be implemented, it would go through this body.
You're the go, no go.
We rely on a lot of recommendations from other people, so ultimately, we have the legal responsibility to make that determination.
And it's not an enviable position.
Yes.
Well, make the right decision.
We are trying our best to make the best decision we can for all students across the district. It's obvious from not just what we've heard here tonight, but what we've seen on social media and what we've seen in the email is that no matter what we decide, a good chunk of the town is probably going to be angry. So it's not specific to either or, it's whatever we do, there's going to be a large group of people, I think, who are unhappy.
That goes with the job.
It absolutely does.
Provide choice for people or provide no choice.
So,
It's an obvious choice to choose.
so with that, I think we're going to move into our next agenda item, which is recognitions.
Okay, so I do have a lovely recognition this evening. Kevin Gu, who is one of our high school students. He began with Scholastic Art and Writing and became one of 40 semifinalists, and he is currently one of 5 finalists nationwide, and he represents the Northeast region, and so he has been named a national student poet in the country. It is an amazing, really, achievement. He was, I believe that there were 19,000 submissions to this contest, and he is one of 5 finalists. And there was a nice story about him in the Boston Herald, so I thought I would just read a small portion of it. Gu said, although he only began writing poetry a couple of years ago, it was definitely incorporated into my life from a young age. As a child of immigrants, I can recount numerous stories my father told me at night. Gu took those stories as an avenue to explore his own writing and Chinese heritage through poetry. He enjoys writing all types of poetry and often focuses his works on his childhood, his parents' struggles, and Chinese culture. So just congratulations to Kevin Gu, and thank you for putting Hopkinton on the map. He's got so much to be proud of.
That's a tremendous honor.
It is.
Yes.
Can I just say, they linked one of his poems in one of the articles, and they put it out in both Mandarin and English. Thankfully, it was in English. And I was just so impressed with the way he wove his own personal identity and his culture into his poetry. It was beautifully written, and it was just culturally very rich. And I really enjoyed the poem that they shared through the link. I don't know if anyone else saw it, but it was interesting.
In the times that I've been fortunate enough to communicate with him, he is always so articulate and bright, and yeah, it's a pleasure.
Fabulous.
And I suspect some of our teachers have had a guiding hand there with him
Yes.
too. So
Yes, I think if you go online and you look at his online reception of the award, I think Fred Haas is there with him.
Oh.
one of his
Oh, how
teachers.
nice.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
great,
All right.
super.
Thank you for that. So just because we are not a full committee tonight, we do have 2 members not able to be with us. We are going to put the annual norms review off to a next meeting so that people can review what was changed from the last time we went through this, as well as old business item B, which is the educational equity second reading policy. So we will come back to those in a future meeting. So that moves us into new business, and the first item on there is the face covering discussion, which I know probably a lot of people are tuned in to hear.
So what I would like to do with this presentation is just to offer you data and perhaps even, just sort of some of the, I guess, as we go back to school, some of the other pieces about reentry, so that you have a sense of what the district is doing and thinking at this point in time. So there is a timeline involved. The Commissioner of Education has determined that face coverings will be made at the local level. So all of those decisions are made in communities. He does have a recommendation, he's got some guidance, but ultimately the decision falls to you, and you'll see the only way that that might be alterable. So tonight we're having this conversation. There is no vote tonight, and then next Thursday on August 19th, the school committee will very likely vote on choices around masking for the 21-22 school year. Now, that said, when we ask who votes, and I know that some of our public commenters tonight wanted to know that, but in the absence of a local Board of Health mandate, so school committees do have the authority to adopt district policies. And so that's really where you are, and as a result of this policy, if there is some kind of impact on teaching, on the teachers in the Hopkinton Teachers Association, the implementation would be subject to bargaining. All right, so our goals in the Hopkinton Public Schools, we just want our students to have access to equitable, inclusive, and reasonably safe learning environments that uphold COVID-19 safety measures and protocols. We want to ensure the mental, social, and emotional health of students and staff, and I hope that you will consider those things in the decision-making process. And the district and its community members will value diversity as an asset to learning and promote social justice and post-pandemic healing. And so I know that when we go back to school, it's not really just about mask wearing, but there is that piece that we'll have some students with us who have not been in school for well over a year, and they haven't done school. So there's going to be a lot of change when we get back to school. I would also like to say that decisions around mask wearing should be fluid. Right now, we have input from 3 governing agencies, and that's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Mass Department of Public Health, and the CDC. And while each of these agencies makes a strong recommendation, the wearing of masks, about the wearing of masks, no one will actually come out and sort of mandate or require them or not require them. So. All right, that's a little bit small, but I'll let you know what DESE has to say. So DESE collaborated with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And when they did, this is what they came up with. They strongly recommend that all students in kindergarten through grade 6 wear masks when indoors, except students who can't do so because of medical conditions or behavioral needs. Masks are not necessary outdoors, and they may be removed while eating indoors. DESE and the DPH also strongly recommend that unvaccinated staff in all grades, unvaccinated students in grades 7 and above, and unvaccinated visitors wear masks indoors, in alignment with the statewide advisory on masking. DESE and the Department of Public Health recommend that schools allow vaccinated students to remain unmasked. Any individual at higher risk for severe disease from COVID or with a household member who is at high risk is encouraged to mask regardless of your vaccination status, and that's consistent with the updated DPH advisory on face coverings and masks. Any child or family who prefers to mask at school should be supported in this choice, and by federal public health order, all students and staff are required to wear masks on school buses at this time. So buses are not negotiable. And as you can see in the orange-colored oval, in conversations with Hopkinton's Director of Public Health, he is in support of this DESE and Mass Department of Public Health guidance. Okay. Now, on the flip side, we have the CDC, and the CDC has issued the following. The CDC recommends universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors to K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status. Children should return to full-time in-person learning in the fall with layered prevention strategies in place. And the American Academy of Pediatrics strongly recommends in-person learning and urges all who are eligible to be vaccinated to protect against COVID-19. In addition to vaccinations, the AAP recommends a layered approach to make schools safe for all students, teachers, and staff. That includes a recommendation that everyone older than 2 wear masks regardless of vaccination status. So you can see the split between DESE and the Mass Department of Public Health and the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics. All right, what you see there now are Hopkinton's vaccination metrics. People have seen these and they are saying, why is it that we have 16 to 19-year-olds, only 987 students, but we have 1,088 with at least 1 dose? And just so people are aware, the discrepancy in those numbers comes from the fact that In population, those numbers are taken directly from the census. So not every family fills out the census. So we have on record that there are 987 kids between the ages of 16 and 19, but when they go and get vaccinated and they are reporting to public health officials, you can see that there are significantly more kids who fall into that category. At any rate, when we look at individuals with one dose and then fully vaccinated individuals, you can see that our vaccination rates in Hopkinton are super high. Better than 95% of the students 16 to 19 years old are vaccinated at this time. So our numbers relative to those across the state are really very good. And so people are probably wondering how many active cases there are in Hopkinton right now. And I did want to do some fact checking today. So even though that dashboard says that there are 7 active cases, in discussions with the public health official today, that hasn't been updated for several days. And so right now, since August 1st, there have been 30 active cases in Hopkinton. So 30 cases since August 1. And, one of the things that Mr. McAuliffe said to me on the phone today is that that might sound like an alarming number when you hear 30. But when you take a look at who are the people who are COVID positive right now, they really are in some ways isolated to individual families. And these are families who, predominantly families who have traveled either in-state or out of state. So say, for example, a family went to Provincetown, they could be recorded in that data. Or a family traveled to Florida, they could be recorded in that data. So we are seeing this within families, and the number since August 1st is 30. And maybe I've gone a long way to say that the transmission really is, within households. All right, but again, choices around masking do need to be fluid, and, what we really need to be thinking about is the science and the number of cases at any given point in time. But what we keep hearing about now, anyone who's been watching the news, if you pick up the newspaper, if you're on social media, wherever you are, people are talking about the Delta variant. And so there are sort of 3 ways to categorize variants. And so it could be a variant of interest, a variant of concern, or a variant of high consequence. And as it turns out, the Delta variant is a variant of concern. It does, in fact, cause more infections and spread faster than earlier forms of the virus. It could cause more severe illness than previous strains in unvaccinated people. But vaccines continue to prove to be very highly effective at preventing hospitalization and death, including against the Delta variant. And so we are seeing some breakthroughs for people who are fully vaccinated at this point in time. But what we're not seeing is, people who are, hospitalized for intensely long periods of time. And so what does that sort of mean when we talk about the contagiousness of the Delta variant? This information comes from NPR. And so you can take a look at the original COVID-19 strain. And what you're seeing there are called R0 values. And so what it's asking us, or what it's telling us, is that if the dark orange person is the COVID positive person, that original strain would likely have spread to 3 people. So that has an R0 value of 3. The Delta strain has an R0 value of 7. And so you can see that you have more people who are becoming infected from that singular contagious person when the variant is the form of COVID that person has. But what's interesting also about this graphic is that you can see that if you are talking about chickenpox, for example, what you're looking at there is you've got one person who can potentially, very likely, infect 10 people, so that's got an R0 value of 10. Measles goes all the way up to 18 people. So I thought that this was a little bit interesting and something to think about, given the fact that we keep hearing about the Delta variant. All right, we will be, when school begins, still doing the Are You Feeling Ill? Sean McAuliffe, every time he talks to me about COVID, he says, if COVID positive people don't enter your school, you're not going to have transmission of the virus. So we will be living with the old rules that, if a staff member has any symptoms, that person should report their absence to the school and stay at home from school. Follow up with your healthcare provider, and then you're, allowed to return to school when you are symptom-free and fever-free for 24 hours. And if a staff member becomes ill at school, that staff member will be sent home immediately. And a similar situation for students and families. What we're really asking students and families is if you have symptoms, don't even get on the school bus. And we're asking parents to really check in with their kids in the morning. You know, not just a, gee, he didn't look sick on the way out the door, but, you know, that kind of formalized check-in with your children. If a student has symptoms, they should stay home from school. The family should notify the school nurse. The family should definitely call the pediatrician. And again, when you get to that place of, you know, there's been a diagnosis and you followed the virus through, or the symptoms have gone away and the child's been seen by a medical professional and you've had consultation with the nurse and you're fever-free and symptom-free for 24 hours, you certainly can come back into school. Lunch. This is an important thing for people to understand. And so I'll go slowly through this slide. Everyone knows that in the Hopkinton Public Schools, we have been putting additions on our building to continue to add classrooms because we have so many students who have moved into this community. What has also happened is that, or what hasn't happened is we have not enlarged our cafeteria spaces. So we have more students, but the same amount of cafeteria space. So the truth of the matter is that we really have space constraints in all 5 of our cafeterias. So when our kids are going to be eating lunch, and you could see on the DESE slide that students are allowed to remove their masks indoors to eat lunch, our students are going to be within fewer than 3 feet. And that's just sort of the way it is. We really don't have many options there. You know, people will say, well, how could you make that happen within 6 feet or 3 feet last spring? But, you know, at those times we had taken over the gymnasiums, we had purchased desks, and we also have to remember that at elementary levels, we probably had 35 or 40% of our kids in some cases who were being taught remotely. And so now that all of those students are back and physical education is back and kids are back using the auditoriums, you know, we are really space constrained. So, you know, and I promised the building principals I would reiterate that kids will be at the typical lunch tables that they've always used, and that's where they will eat lunch. One thing to note is that students will have assigned seats. So you will always be sitting next to the same students. And so if there is someone who sits next to you at lunch who tests positive for COVID, you know, you will know exactly, you know, who are close contacts. And that's important information, I think.
Can I ask
Sure.
a question related to
Yes.
assigned seats for lunch? I'm assuming would be far more difficult at the high school.
It will be very difficult at the high school.
And will that still be true at the high school, even though their schedules are so?
I think Mr. Bishop will do his best to make that happen, but it really will be difficult because every day the lunch that you go to is predicated on one of your class periods, and they are
Right.
rotating class periods. So it makes it wonderfully challenging there. I'm less concerned, I think, about the assigned seating at the high school, even though they'll be in close quarters and you may not have assigned seating in the same way that a second grader would. But if we look at those numbers, 95% of our high school students have either been vaccinated or, you know, have had the opportunity for vaccination. So. All right, on school buses, passengers and drivers must wear a mask on the school buses, and we will be keeping our windows cracked, just like we did last year. For immunocompromised students, and this is a small fraction of our kids, but a very important fraction of our students. Unfortunately, the commissioner has said school districts cannot have that sort of universal remote learning that we had last year. So last year we said to people, would you like to be remote or would you like to be hybrid? There is no more remote. I mean, the expectation from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is that all students will be coming into school. They'll be coming into school 5 days a week and they'll be coming in full time. So we do have some students who are immunocompromised and would really struggle under those conditions. What the district is looking into is an online virtual learning platform where we can buy seats for students. And so that would really have to be the plan for our children who are not able to, learn in person for health reasons. Obviously, those would be very limited cases. We certainly can't say that well, because a student lives with, someone in the household who may have a health condition, this would have to be the student, him or her, or their self. Okay. One thing that we are looking at, and, this is still something that we're exploring, but in the event that you are sitting at lunch and the person who sat next to you yesterday turns out to be COVID positive, one of the things that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is engaging with schools to do is something called test and stay. And so if you sat next to someone who was COVID positive, using those Binax Now rapid antigen tests, you could be tested by the school nurse every single day for at least 5 days from your date of exposure. And in the event that each one of those days you test negative, the great part is that you don't have to leave school, you can stay there. So that kind of quarantining would be eliminated. But we need to remember that this applies only to situations where a student had an exposure at school.
Okay.
All right, and then reviewing our masking practices, what I would recommend to the committee is that roughly once a month, we kind of take a look at where are we? What are the numbers in Hopkinton? And how many kids in our schools have tested positive? How have there been any in-school transmissions of the virus? If so, under what conditions? And then we can really take a look at the practices in our school. I think we have a meeting on the 24th of September, 23rd of September? Yeah. And so that might be another time for us to just sort of sit down and take a look at this data again. I think between the 1st of September and the 23rd of September, even though it sounds like an awful lot of days, there may only be about 12 actual school days. So I'm not sure how much data we'll have, but all right, and that's all.
This was really helpful. Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. Do you know how much those Binax Now rapid antigen tests cost?
So there was a webinar yesterday, and our head nurse, Kathy Bain, attended it. So I don't know the actual cost. I don't know if either of you do. But from what I understand, there's assistance, too, for school districts if you're using the Binax Now.
One option also that may be available, what we were able to do with the costs from the spring is we actually submitted those costs to be reimbursed through FEMA, which is a different funding than all the CARES that we've done. So there's always that possibility too when we're looking at the costs.
And can you just remind us the percentage of students who tested regularly last year? My recollection is that was a low number.
It was very low, yes. I mean, we never got over 30%. We were lucky if we were over 20% of our
And that's
students who
across
tested.
5 buildings.
That's across 5 buildings, yes. And so, when we would look at the numbers, we'd say, oh, that's great. We've hit, 800 students,
Right.
or, we're approaching 900 students, but when you have 4,000 in the district, the percentage is very low.
Dr. Kavanaugh, do you know yet for athletics if there's been any indication that there would be any changes to this year's season?
I do not believe there will be changes. I spoke to our athletic director, Mr. Cormier, who said that at this time, MIAA has no intention to make any alterations to their seasons. And, obviously that could change. As we say, it's fluid, but right now it's status quo with athletics.
So presumably athletes would be unmasked as during their practices,
yes.
competitions,
Mhm.
etc. Okay.
And again, we can remember that those are predominantly high school students who are, competing in MIAA. And again, high vaccination rates.
Yep.
Do you know how our vaccination rates compare to other districts? It seems they're incredibly high here, which is great.
They are incredibly high here, yes.
Are other districts showing similar numbers for their teenagers?
I think we're about the highest, to tell you the truth.
That's really good to know.
I did see that Hopkinton, not just the schools, but as a whole, is one of the highest communities in the state. In that upper tier. In terms of PE, one of the things that we had done in the spring was kids were outdoors when possible. Is that something that is still going to be encouraged to get kids outside for PE when weather allows?
That will be encouraged, yes, because if, we keep thinking about when will students be able to, if they are masked, when would they be able to take their masks off? And PE is a wonderful opportunity for that to happen when it happens outdoors, in addition to things like recess.
Anything on singing musical instruments that we would want to take into consideration?
The mass music educators have handed to music educators across the state the same guidance that was in place last spring. That is correct from Craig, correct?
We just got something from him.
Yes, I think so. So I think Mr. Hay, one of the things he had said in his email to us is what we were doing last spring, we're already doing, so he feels very comfortable about where a need not to change if masking is required, and if masking is not required, then. That's an interesting setting, though, when people are playing music, musical instruments that require a lot of wind.
Or singing or performing.
Or,
Or
yeah.
performing? And any other thoughts or questions?
It might be worth simply repeating that whatever decision we make, we don't necessarily have to make a blanket decision for the entire district. That it could be a school by school or age group by age group decision.
And that it is something that we could visit it
Revisit,
on a monthly basis.
yes.
I think probably must revisit
Yes.
on a regular basis because conditions are fluid.
Right. Okay, so we will come back to this then next week, and I'm sure there will be new information. It seems like this information comes out very rapidly.
It does.
So thank you for pulling all
Thank
that
you.
from so many sources. That brings us into new business item B, which is the Elmwood School gift account.
Easy one. Okay, so the Elmwood School gift account. They have Stop and Shop A+ rewards, and they are looking to you to approve a check in the amount of $177.12, which will be deposited in their gift account.
I move to approve the check for $177.12 for the Elmwood School.
I second.
Okay, motion by Meg, second by Amanda. All those in favor?
Aye.
It is unanimous, and so passes. And that brings us down to the vote to ratify the MOA, Memorandum of Agreement with the HTA at the middle school.
Okay, so this memorandum of agreement surrounds the middle school schedule, and typically, teachers don't vote on new schedules, and the school committee doesn't vote on a new schedule. It only happens that you would be voting on this if there is a very specific change to contract language. And that's the case in these situations. So what you're seeing here is an increase in the number of periods when teachers are supporting kids academically. And so it used to be that, there were infrequent Hiller blocks, and now there's going to be a Hiller block every other day, which hopefully will, kind of help to ground our kids and get them some of the remediation that they need as they come back following the pandemic. And so we are looking for you to approve the MOA with the Hopkinton Teachers Association for the middle school.
Can I just say that with this schedule change, one thing I really appreciated was that every subject is going to now be taught every day, I believe, at the middle school. So
Yes.
the consistency of the new schedule, to me, really supports learning.
Yes.
So I was appreciative of that.
Okay, so is there a motion?
Yes, I would like to move to approve the MOA with the HTA Middle School.
Second.
Okay, motion by Meg, second by Amanda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous for the three of us, and passes. And that brings us into the ratification vote for the MOA with the HTA at the high school.
Okay, so a very similar situation. There will be 2 periods a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays called Flex Block, and that will allow students to meet with their teachers to makeup tests and quizzes, to get some kind of remediation, to just have some additional academic support in a class. And that was the change to the contract language, is that there would be 2 flex blocks a week, which is why the HTA had to ratify it, and that was ratified only by high school teachers, and why you need to do that as well.
I would like to make a motion to approve the MOA with the HTA at the high school.
I second.
Okay, motion by Meg, second by Amanda. All those in favor? Aye. Unanimous and also passes. And that brings us down to item E, which is the marathon school bid. And that's you.
Thank you. As you can see from in the packet, we put out a request for services for the owner's project manager for the addition for Marathon School. The packet went out in June with bids due in July. We also had an optional walkthrough at the Marathon School. Several vendors requested the bid package, but as typically happens in procurement, 7 only submitted the bid. Within the bid document, there's specific evaluation criteria. There was a selection committee that consisted of Dr. Kavanaugh, superintendent, Ms. Dubois, the marathon principal, Mr. Person, the director of building and grounds, Ms. Rothermick, the director of finance, and Mr. Del Torio, the town of Hopkinton town engineer. So this reviewing committee went through the bids that were submitted and selected top 3 vendors, each of which were interviewed, and the references on all 3 were checked. At this time, we've come up with the top vendor and would like to enter into negotiations for a contract to be the owner's project manager. So what I'm looking for is the committee to authorize me to negotiate and execute that contract, staying within the approved budget of $3,625,000.
Okay. Any questions, or are we ready for?
The process looked great. We have excellent professionals who do due diligence on this, so I would definitely make a motion to authorize Ms. Rothermick to negotiate.
And I will second that.
Okay, so that is a motion by Amanda, a second by Meg. All those in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous, and so passes as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
One item of information that I will offer going through this process, one consistent thing that we heard from each vendor we interviewed was the potential of this budget being very tight. As we discussed with the high school project, the increased costs due to supply chain, COVID pressure could make this difficult, but we'll continue to watch that process as we go along, and we'll come up with ways to address it.
Great.
It's something for the committee to be aware of.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us know.
So the next item on here I had put on, it's regarding policy BEDH, which is public participation at school committee meetings. And I put it on as a question if we wanted to have that reviewed by our working group reviewing the policy, because in the past year we had obviously when we were meeting remotely, we had to adopt a different way of doing public comment. We've now switched back to in person, but I do realize, I hate to say this out loud, but there is a potential that we would need to go remote at some point again. And I don't know if the working group wants to look at kind of codifying what we would do in situations where we go remote for any reason, to add that to the policy, and just to look at it for a periodic review. So that was my thoughts on that. There had been some questions that I had from people that have not that don't always follow all of our meetings that we're following when we were doing them remotely.
Okay.
That we're looking to see if they would be able to send their comments in by email, which we had reverted back to the regular policy and we have not been doing.
Okay.
So just wanted to kick that down to.
So you just wanted to add that to our list.
I did, actually.
Yeah.
You guys are really excellent with policy, and whatever you
Yeah, fine. Just
wave your
put
magic
it on the
wand.
list, Nancy. We'll take care of it.
All right, thank you.
I mean, I think it's a good idea to look at it. I read it through. I definitely think there is some updates, even in terms of the pronouns that appear in throughout the document. A little bit might need to be updated. And maybe looking also at sort of how we state whether there's exchange, how the public comments can be heard and to whom they should be addressed and how that works.
Okay.
So just another
Look-see.
little look-see.
All right. So that then brings us into item G, which is the superintendent's goals.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not sure if the community is aware, but one of the jobs of the school committee is to approve my goals for the year, and then ultimately, by the end of the year, determine whether or not those goals have been met. So this is just my first pass at the 2021-2022 set of goals, and there are 4 of them here. The first is a student achievement goal. And we are returning after a long period of time where kids have either been out of school or in school every other day or taught remotely. Some kids have been doing school online and have never actually stepped foot in a brick and mortar building. And so, as they are coming back in, there are all kinds of things that we'll be looking at. But one of the things we want to make sure that we are in addressing kids' needs is to really look at them academically this year. So we have one consistent means, K to 12, and we really will be talking about using this from kindergarten through grade 10. At kindergarten, we use it, to do dyslexia screening, but also to have some kind of understanding of where kids are as readers. But, as they move through, they are able to take this STAR reading test, and it takes, a very short period of time. It is sort of nationally normed. It's an adaptive test, so if I get the answer right, I may get a more challenging question. If I get the answer wrong, I may get an easier question. But it gives us immediate data. And yes, it gives us 30,000-foot data, but it helps us to understand who might have needs that are not being met. And then we are able to take that data and triangulate it. So one of my goals for this year is to ensure that every student, K to 12, is getting the STAR reading test. And that has to happen in a window if we're going to be able to see the data. If the teacher takes it outside of the window, we don't get that teacher's data in it. So we have to be very careful about it. But I want to ensure that we're using other complementary data to better define students' learning profiles. So STAR will tell us one thing, but there are many other ways for us to understand students as readers. And then working with Mrs. Parsons, Assistant Superintendent, and our ELA Director, Deb Moriarty, we'll be reviewing that data and we'll be looking at patterns and trends. Some of the work that we just did recently at our administrative retreat was to take a look at some MCAS scores and to look at those MCAS scores by subgroup and to say, why is it that this subgroup always seems to be performing at this level when other people are performing at different levels, and what is it that we may not be doing to reach that particular group of students. So number 4, to set goals for all students who aren't reading primarily or performing in the content areas at grade level. So STAR is not just about reading in ELA. It's also going to help us to better understand who might be in a middle school classroom, for example, in a room where the science teacher hands out something to read and the science teacher may be unaware that that child is unable to access that particular text. So what is it that we can do to ensure access in the content areas as well? I like to think about that in terms of disciplinary literacy, and so we're kind of dabbling in that a little bit at the middle school, but there should hopefully be something nicely programmatic at the high school. And so the high school will have a goal around writing in and across disciplines, and one of the things that we've been talking about there is that if you are a reader and a writer in social sciences or in the physical sciences or in ELA or in mathematics or engineering, those kinds of writing are different. In science, you might be writing in the passive voice, past tense, and you're really succinct, and there's no superfluousness about that, because the goal of that writing might be to be able to take some kind of experiment, replicate it, and build upon it. But in English language arts, we want our kids to be writing complex sentences. We want them to have sentence variety. We're in the active voice. We're in the present tense. And so kids need to start seeing that kind of writing. And if we are asking them to do lots of short writing in the disciplines, they'll get a sense of that, but they'll also be able to start mining text for information. So I like to call that writing in the service of reading. They'll become better readers as a result of these writing tasks. So. At the middle school, employ some professional learning communities to evaluate student learning and to adjust instructional practices accordingly. This work is actually hand in glove with Mr. Ghosh's doctoral work. So we're really excited to have him be doing that work with some of our middle school teachers. And in grades K to 8, just to ensure that there is substantive remedial programs available for all of our struggling readers. And you can see the product benchmarks, and that just means what will you see along the way, so that you know that these things are taking place as we move from September to June. And then when we get down to the bottom, the evidence will occasionally be something different, or it might just be all of those product benchmarks that take us along the way. These middle pieces show us where these are tied to the superintendent's rubric. This particular goal is tied in terms of curriculum and instruction and assessment, and the goal is aligned under our district improvement plan under enrollment growth and value individual pathways to prioritize high quality curriculum instruction and assessment and the implementation of best practices and accounting for the evolving profile of our student population. All right, my second one, you know that I have always had a diversity, equity, and inclusion goal, social justice, anti-racism, and so this year is no different. One of the things we have not had in the past is a protocol for responding to incidents of hate and bias. And we did find that the Acton Boxborough Public Schools had a very nice document along those lines. And this summer, Laura Tice and Chris Ocampo, who are the middle school and high school assistant principals, have really developed one for us. And so at our admin retreat in the last couple of days, they were able to present that. The other piece that goes along with this is, and I know this is kind of a funny acronym, but we thought, well, why not? No one else will ever use this acronym, is we will have a bias incident reporting form, and it's online, and kids can just scan a QR code. One of the things that kids will tell us all the time is, no, I don't think I was bullied, but there were so many different like small incidents where there was a microaggression or there was an incident of hate, and it would have been nice for me to be able to share that with someone or to report it to someone. So we now have what's called a BIRF, a bias incident reporting form. And we're really excited actually to have that, because I think not only will it help kids to, kind of navigate what happened and to have an adult help them to resolution with that, but we may actually start to see patterns, if we have that over time, which will be interesting for us. I'll continue to keep up with the blog and use that for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll continue to diversify the workforce. So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is running workshops, and Hopkinton has applied to begin one of those workshops. We were accepted. So there will be 5 of us working with DESE to help with that diversification of workforce as well. Laura and Chris have also created affinity groups for the staff, and I think that they have a couple of those going on now. We are offering a new course to all 9th grade students, the title of which is Respecting Human Identities. And so if these don't match perfectly, it's because some things have been added after admin retreat. I wanted permission to see people's work in there. At every school, there is some new DEI work embedded into the curriculum, which is really very exciting. Even like Marathon has a windows and mirrors project going, which is really nice. As you know, last year we did black print consulting, and this year we'll enter into year 2 with them. At the close of the last school year, they gave us a really nice document, 7 forms of bias, and you can take these, and there's a protocol. You take those 7 forms of bias and you hold it up to math word problems, some kind of text. We took it out for a little test drive at the administrative retreat, and it really is nice for people to start to look for, well, here's something I hadn't thought of, invisibility, who isn't in this text. So they're just, I really like it, and I think black print has been a good group for us to work with. It takes an awful lot of time, and there's been excellent commitment, I think, on the part of, especially of our elementary administrators who have all been a part of that.
Is that something that you can share? Is it only for attendees at the workshops with Black Print, or could you share that 7 forms?
I would love to share that with you. Yeah, we looked at the 7 forms. There's a graphic organizer so you can fill in what you're seeing, and then there's a protocol for a small group to work with. And we're really hoping that even if we give them to CTLs and SMLs or department heads, there'll be time when they can take those things for a test drive. And I think even, as you get really familiar with the 7 forms, then it just becomes almost this, I've assimilated it as a habit of mind, and as I read this, I look for it, which that would be the ideal.
That's
right?
great.
Yeah. We are still aligned with the Hopkinton Freedom Team. The Hopkinton Freedom Team, a couple of its, student members and recent graduate members have approached the high school administration because what they would like to do is to form a sort of mentor protege program. So we could have, say, a high school junior matched up with a high school freshman, and they would both be from, sort of similar marginalized groups, and kind of talk through some of the experiences, and then there would be what they're calling pods. So there'd be one adult with 3 pairs of mentor protege, and then someone who might be an advisor to the whole group. So I know, I really love that one. And that was really Freedom Team generated. And so Laura Tice is kind of trying to figure out with the kids who will sort of be the governing body. Would it be Freedom Team? Would it be the Hopkinton Public Schools? And if so, like, how does the responsibility and the, adult intervention work? But, certainly they can use our space, for something like that. We will be reaching out and getting training in restorative practices and restorative justice for our administrative team. I think one of the things that we have seen is that, obviously the needs at Marathon are very different from the needs at the high school, but we would love to have kind of consistent ideologies and language and all of that. We are in the process of revising the bullying prevention intervention document. We are very excited to be hiring a .6 school social worker. That will be grant funded, and the data that we have been able to harvest has indicated a need for that. And the goal of this social worker, I think, primarily is to work with some of our families. We're seeing that families need some wraparound services, families need some support, and hopefully, if we have that interaction of a social worker, the support at home will help kids to better access curriculum when they're in school. I will be working with Dr. Zaleski, the Director of Student Services, and the Director of English Language Acquisition, Equity, and Access, Jennifer Suker, to see if we can't grow CPAC and LPAC a little bit. They are great organizations, and we would, love to see just more collaboration between CPAC, LPAC, and the schools, and certainly working with Dr. Zaleski to keep growing that 18 to 22 business.
Yep.
That is super exciting. Again, you can see the ties to the superintendent's rubric, some of the key products and benchmarks, a tie to the current strategic plan to create inclusive cultures, to celebrate diversity and backgrounds and build relationships across race, class, gender, and learning abilities to create caring learning communities, grow partnerships between families and schools. Okay, and then goal number 3 is the one that we talked about last year, and I think, due to the pandemic and not being invited into the MSBA until around about April, that didn't really come to fruition. But it's to address enrollment growth and ultimately building use and expansion throughout the entire district, resulting in a written 3 to 5 year plan. We will work very closely with the MSBA and the Hopkinton Elementary School Building Committee 2 on the Elmwood project. Obviously, Mrs. Rothermick, as the Director of Finance and Operations, as well as Tim Person, Director of Facilities, will be very involved in this work. We will engage a hired consultant to assess the enrollment impact on facilities. And that it's getting interesting now because, we need to kind of do that work for ourselves across sort of 5 buildings, but we also need to do it as part of a feasibility study for the Elmwood project. We will go back and review that report that Roseanne Drummy and Anderson DRA did for us a few years ago now. Obviously, public forums. There will be work with the ESBC too, especially with the communications representative, who is John Graziano, to ensure that public information and public dialogue is just coming and going all the time. We will meet all of the MSBA deadlines for eligibility and feasibility. We just had a huge deadline on August 2nd that we managed to accomplish. The Director of Finance and Operations and I will update the school committee at most meetings on the progress of, sort of where we are with things. And eventually we will issue a report to the community with recommendations to address enrollment and its impact on the district's academic and facilities planning. And I think that that's a big K-12 project, not just a singular Elmwood project. Again, you can see where it's tied to the superintendent's rubric and tied to current strategic objectives to plan for human resource facility and equipment needs, to build budgets that propel innovation, to launch initiatives that build leadership, innovation, and practical and agile programmatic expansion, and planning for facility and equipment needs. Oops, we got that one twice. I'm sorry. All right. And then the last one really is around the administrative team. The administrative team is one that has been in place for a long time. Obviously, there are, a couple of newcomers, so like Laura Tice, Chris Ocampo, Shannon, they've come in over the last couple of years, and I think that they have fit in beautifully. And I think each one of the individual buildings has an amazingly strong team, and central office has amazingly competent people. But, over the last year, there's been strain, and that's obviously happened because we've never lived through a pandemic before. And, each week what's going to happen next. And so I would really like to take some time to grow relationships, grow communication, grow collaboration. So one of the things that I'm doing this year is meeting with each building principal once a week for, an hour. And what might happen during that time? We might do walkthroughs. We might take some of that STAR data and take a look at it. We might have climate discussions. How are things in your building? Are you building trust back? I know the building principals are very concerned about, some of the trust that was lost with the teachers and the Teachers Association last year. So I think that this is an important professional practice goal for me, but I think it's also maybe an important district improvement kind of a goal. I would like to also establish a district climate team. We've had that written into our bullying prevention and intervention report for ages. And even though it has said that we've had one and they'd be looking at things, we really do not have a district climate team. I'd like to work with the building principals on student transitions from building to building. And then really just use a portion of every administrative council meeting, and we meet twice a month, once by Zoom, once in person, and just really grow our group as a better functioning team so that people feel integrated into the work. They have an understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. They have an understanding of what the kids look like when they're coming and going. And those are just, it may sound superficial, but I think it's a goal that we need right now. And I don't know if the committee has suggestions for something else that you think might be missing here, but this is my initial thinking about goals.
I think it sounds great, and I especially like the administrative one because they've been under more pressure than anyone this past year, and just to give them time to talk and to be listened to, it's really important.
Yes.
They've done a stellar job.
Yeah, they've been amazing, and they've been through the ringer a little bit. Yeah.
I really like the second, I think it's the second goal on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that after, a few years now of laying the foundation, we're starting to give tools for our students as well as our staff to actually identify incidences of bias and then address them in an age-appropriate way, in a way that's appropriate for the setting, have students know that they know how to identify and report something and get help. I love that we're there. I think you've been working really hard at building the foundation to enable us to get here. So that's exciting to see.
Yeah, and I will say now it in some ways kind of runs itself. It's really lovely to see what the diversity team at the high school and the middle school have taken on.
Yeah, it's really good. On the district, the growth goal, is that the third goal?
Yeah.
I think you sort of referenced, but you didn't reference by name, the campus planning study. So I just, that's a
Okay,
big effort that I
sure.
think
Yeah.
it takes it beyond Elmwood. I think you sort of reference it, and the public forums were mentioned in conjunction with Elmwood, but probably also as needed in conjunction with the campus planning study. So I just probably throw that in there.
Okay. Yes, and I think, some of the other documents that I may want to add to that are just the things that we looked at when we went through the process of building Marathon.
Yeah.
Because so many parcels of land were analyzed then as well.
I think these are great, and really on point, all four of them. I love the birth.
I love the verb. We really did talk about it, and we thought, oh, no one else will ever use that acronym. So-
It is all good, and I'm excited,
Yeah.
so.
So we don't vote these tonight, though. We're voting, this is just the first reading, so we'll see them. We can sort of chew on this a little bit.
Yes.
And send you any thoughts or.
Yes. I think they may come back next week with the district improvement plan.
Oh, perfect. That ties in nicely together. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the year financial report.
Okay. Oh, you want to see if I can project
Oh, yes.
this page up?
Okay.
Get closer. It's small.
Okay,
Also came to this today.
so the end of year financial report, we went through this about the middle of June to discuss kind of where we were. And as you can see, at this point in time, the variance for the end of the year is a positive variance of $34,000, which will go back to the town's general fund. So you can see from the two categories, we were under in payroll, but over in expenses. And as we shift down, you can see a lot of this is what we discussed in June, in terms of just the different things that happened during COVID, with staffing, if you will. Positions became very stressed. Some were unfilled for periods of time. Staff moved to cover absences. Staff resigned in the middle of the year, so it was trying in terms of what we were doing with our staffing. But again, at the end of the day, we did end up with a positive variance because we did end up being able to cover a lot of these positions. The other piece that we talked about was not using our revolving accounts, such as the international tuition, the athletic revolving, and the preschool revolving. All of those accounts were strained in terms of the revenue that came in. So not using those accounts, which are budget offsets, will put us in a better position going forward as far as the payroll goes. From an expense side, as we went through the year, buildings and departments shifted where they needed to spend their money. Different things came out, such as the VHS, additional VHS classes for distance learning. So you can see what the shifts were and adjustments. We talked about the food service deficit and how that came about back in June or May. So we funded that account back up to the cash balance that it needed to be to cover prepaid accounts that were in there and to cover the deficit that we had from an operational standpoint. We ended in not using the bus fee revolving was a shift, but also a gain with the contract negotiations. So there was a little bit of offset of not using the bus revolving, but yet we had that offset of contract positive negotiations. The special ed transportation, and except not doing the transportation, but yet parents were actually providing their own transportation, and the district reimbursing for the mileage. So that positive variance allowed us to do the White House project. So this is where the shift of what was happening, the priorities of the district shifted as well. And so you can see what the remaining variances were for the expenses. But at the end of the day, through a very tumultuous year, we will be giving $34,000 back to the town.
That's good news.
That is good news.
And just for review, in part for me, the money that we give back to the town is what comes back later to be known as free cash once it's
Correct.
certified, and the town is able to use that for other budget
Correct.
things in the capital budget going forward. That's, thank you for
that
this,
is
all
really
this
the
detail.
cover
Yeah.
page. Each page after that gives you the balances of the revolving accounts, the grants, and the capital spending, and where we ended the year.
Thank you. Any questions?
I just a quick question on the grants on ESSER 2. I think we've used part of that today. Have we earmarked the balance already for other uses as well?
The grants for ESSER 2 has been earmarked, so originally, this is where we talked about the testing.
Yes.
Originally was earmarked to be paid for out of here,
Yeah.
but then it became evident that we could apply for FEMA.
For FEMA. Okay.
So that was about $65,000 to $70,000 that we were able to not spend this grant on and submit to FEMA.
Great.
So, but Ms. Parson has already reallocated where that change will come from. And, you know, I think last year there was a lot of shift in terms of where we were using the COVID CARES monies. I think it's a little more clear going forward.
Right.
But, you know, last year as student needs were popping up and different things were put in place, such as the testing, you know, it became those shifts. I think it'll be a little clearer, the hope is, for next year.
That's great. And so also where we have like the career technical,
CVT.
well, I guess I'm asking, is that the CVTE? Does that fund our CVTE coordinator? And would we be looking for another grant for the coming year for that? Or is that a different bucket of money?
No, we received that grant 3 times. And at this point, we have gone forward with the implementation. So a couple of the grants were for planning, and the most recent was for implementation. And so at this point, we feel that first of all, we won't get funded. They've
Right.
already kind of told us that we can't go back a 4th time.
Yeah.
But what we really tried to do was set a foundation and set some sustainable practices within the high school.
Yeah.
So we don't feel that we're going to need to replicate that again, because we have systems and people who have a greater understanding of workforce and internships and work study and things like that.
Okay. And I know there are lots of videos. We have a nice
Yes.
library now of
The
career
gallery,
videos.
yes.
And I mean, there's a lot of great work came out of that grant. That's why I was a little sad to see it at 0, but
I know.
but a lot of great work came out of that. So great, thank you.
Look back, that brings us into, oh, were you gonna say something? I'm sorry.
Nope.
Brings us into policies that we have. The first policy we have is a first reading on policy JICB, student involvement in decision-making.
Okay, I will just interrupt that to say that Kathy Bain says the Binax testing, test and stay, free.
Oh,
only because it kind of fit in with what we were just talking about. So, yeah,
Fantastic,
it's great.
thank you.
Okay, so Hopkinton's current JICB policy, which I had put into the packet, the policy working group went back to review that, because we've often said that, we'll have students who come from student council and tell what's happening at the high school, or occasionally a kid will come for recognition, but really we don't have student participation in these meetings. And technically we are supposed to. So we went back to look at our policy JICB, and one of the first thing we noticed about it is it's not really happening. So what we did was we took our Hopkinton's JICB and we compared it with MASC's JIB. So those are the two things. I'm not sure how we got a C into ours, but nevertheless, it's there. And as we read those two policies sort of side by side, what the policy working group is what UC proposed on sort of the third iteration of it. And what we did was we retitled that first section to be self-government and self-expression. And so what that asks is that, appropriate to the age of the student, that there are government organizations like student councils and those kinds of things. And that students of all ages would be welcome to come to school committee meetings and granted the same privilege that adults have in public comment. And then we took the second part of the MASC and renamed that just a little bit to say that there would be a formal student advisory committee. And you can see the changes to that text that are there at the bottom. But even though Mass General Law will say that you have to meet once every other month, we preferred to say that we would meet at regular intervals, and we were pretty sure that that would also mean once every other month, so we wouldn't want to be out of compliance with that, but it just felt it was a little bit too. We also decided that one member of the Student Advisory Council could come to a meeting, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same student all the time. It could be, but it's certainly nice for us to have different kids come and interact with us.
Right. And we've asked for Mr. Bishop's guidance in choosing the 5 students from the high school.
Yes.
And I have no doubt he'll choose from a diverse group, so.
So to that point, I think my feedback, I think we talked about this before. I have to just say, in general, this policy for me is like it's got a couple different things going on under one umbrella, so I always get nervous when policies are a little disjointed, because the first half says basically students are, as appropriate for their age, they're encouraged and provided opportunities to self-express and participate in self-government. It doesn't actually say anything about administrators listening to the students or like how that happens, or I don't know. It's fine. It doesn't. I like that you changed the titles. It makes it a lot clearer. Personally, I like putting the student self-government stuff in the handbooks. I mean, I like it being. The principals have principals cabinets and advisories and et cetera.
Right.
So for me, I would like to see this spelled out in the middle school and high school handbook. A little bit about what opportunities exist in the district for student self-government, because those are really school-based things, and the handbooks are for middle school and high school are policy. In fact, I think we're hearing about those in one of the next 2 meetings. So for me personally, that first section is a handbooky kind of a thing. I mean, students are by law allowed to come to public meetings. They're public people too, and everybody can come. So that, to me, again, is already sort of something that we do. If we want to keep this here, I think it's okay. But I would love to see the handbooks identify opportunities that the principals have identified for involvement in decision making, because then I think it helps make it accessible to every kid.
Right.
Because they read the handbook and they see it.
That's great.
The second section, I like the changes a lot that you put in. The one member makes total sense. I had written like chair or designee because I think obviously the one chair might not make it. I kind of like the idea of having middle school representation. I don't know if you feel like that's a little young, but I kind of was thinking of a 2-3 split. the middle school, 8th grade, I would designate 8th grade. I think I would go crazy, but I guess I just wanted to see if anyone thought that was, appropriate. And I liked putting in language, and I think I made a suggestion somewhere, that the relevant school principals would determine a fair, inclusive, and representative process to select who serves on the student advisory committee, with at least 3 of the members rotating each year. I'd like to see the members selected by the end of May for the school year to serve in the coming year, so that if something happens over the summer, and we happen to want to tap in, or they want to tap in, we know who they are. So those are just some thoughts for consideration.
So
But how would that work for the incoming ninth graders, though?
They would be identified in the spring.
Okay, they would be identified by the middle school that
Yes,
stepping up. Okay.
And maybe some members could stay, but I definitely would like a healthy rotation of members.
Okay.
Because, we want to make sure that we are giving opportunities to lots of kids to get involved. And I know we don't have all of our members here tonight, so I'm sure we're not voting on this, but those are just some things. I can send you my notes
yeah, please do, always.
if you guys want to think about it.
Okay.
Do you think we need to specify in here that by May, those 5 should be chosen?
I don't know, it would be nice to have it as we start the year, though. I don't know. I think I'm scarred by these 2 summers where so much is going on during the year that I think, gosh, if we needed some student voice around masking, or if, I don't know, if we wanted to talk to our student reps, we don't have access to them. Typically, we're not meeting like this in the summer. So maybe it's just PTSD on COVID.
We do meet in the summer, though, typically.
We meet, but we don't do quite as much business, I feel like, as we've been doing. Maybe.
I could share one thing if you were open to that. So in another local school committee that I'm familiar with, the school committee actually had a student rep for the first time this year. And this student ended up being a sophomore. I think originally we thought it was going to be an older student, but the student came actually out of the school council. And I think there were some growing pains having a student on the committee for the first time, especially a student kind of that age. And it took a little while to kind of get the student acclimated to what the expectations were, and to have the committee kind of get used to having the student present every time. Although in our model, she comes we meet twice a month, and she comes once a month. So I wonder if it might make sense to start the first year with a high school student, and then maybe the benefit of that might be if in the future you want to bring a middle school student, then you'd also have kind of that model, and maybe some high school kids who could kind of help bring that middle school student or any middle school student kind of up to speed.
Yeah.
I suppose the benefit of going the other way, doing everybody at once, is everyone's learning at the same time. But it did involve a little bit of work and kind of instruction and it was a fabulous, fabulous student who was very bright and with it, but they're still kids.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of a learning curve.
That's great, that's a great suggestion.
Great.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was a committee of 5, but then the chair, it said, but so I figured it would be a more senior member would actually come to the meeting, but the committee would, I wasn't really thinking the youngest members might come to the meeting as much as be a part of the committee, but maybe I didn't understand.
I would think sort of like our student council reps don't tend to be the youngest members of the student council. They tend to be
Exactly.
juniors, and it seems like juniors more than seniors, but seniors too.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have, when they're busy with other stuff, we do have sophomores towards the end of the year, but not.
Yeah. And 8th grade might be too young. I mean, I'm not sure. It's just the middle school is so different from the high school, but
Yeah.
So some things to think about.
yeah.
I mean, we could also have a separate advisory committee in the middle school that
Right.
we could meet with as a school committee twice a year, or, I think that the more student input, the healthier for all of us.
I agree.
So we could do that. Add another task to the list.
We do have an exceptional working group around policy. You guys have truly done a lot of work.
and I know you meet early in the morning when you do meet, and it seems like you meet quite a bit, particularly to bring this many.
Very early in the morning, so if you discern some difficulty with the syntax, you know.
Not discerning anything at all, but appreciate it.
But those are good points. Thank you for that, and we'll take it back and we'll chew it over again at dawn.
Thank you. So that then brings us to the next policy, which is policy IGD, curriculum development and adoption. This is also a first reading, so is not something we're looking to vote on either.
Yes, and we took a look at this one because it has not been reviewed since April of 2009. So we were a little bit concerned that it was growing out of date. We read ours, and then of course we went to the MASC. And if you're looking at the two of them side by side, MASC is far more streamlined. One of the things that made me a little bit concerned with ours is that section that says curriculum development will be guided by a set of principles. It will. And then it talks about things like it being based in research. And I think that, you know, if you're choosing, say, for example, an elementary phonics program, you know, that would be an important criterion. When you get down to bullet number 4, include enduring understandings, which indicate what learning has lasting value beyond the curriculum, essential questions, which create an inquiry that guides instruction and knowledge and skills to be attained. That comes directly from Understanding by Design, UBD, with Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. So you've got what I see here, and I know I've only gone through a couple of them, but it's sort of this smattering of things that we do just kind of naturally when we choose curricula. But I'm not sure that they belong in the policy. And, you know, certainly that's, you know, debatable. I'm sure that whoever put this policy together in 2009 thought that would be a great idea. So if we go to the MASC, it's a whole lot more streamlined, as I've said, and what that one simply says is the school committee will rely on the professional staff to design and implement instructional programs and courses of study that will forward the educational goals of the school district. And I kind of like that better than that, you know, sort of potpourri kind of list there that seems to be in a lot of different directions. Either way, neither one, they both say that the superintendent has authority to approve new programs, and they both say that the community wishes to be informed of all new courses and substantive revisions in curriculum. So those are pretty similar.
Questions?
I have comments.
Okay, well, that's great. Go right ahead.
I did definitely like the streamlined one. My only minor suggestions were that we include the middle school program of studies as well in the last paragraph, because we hear from both principals about the new courses.
Okay, great.
I was thinking back to like when we made the change to, you know, our new technology program, and we walked away from the industrial arts program we had before. Those kind of things in the middle school are significant, so I wanted that we could keep that in there. And I didn't know if we could enhance the wording that MASC uses, where it says the superintendent will have the authority to approve new programs and courses of study after they have been thoroughly studied and found to support educational goals. I didn't know we might want to add on to that a little something that said, something like as reflected in the district strategic plan and policies, or something that our goals and our values as expressed. So you say that, but then you think, well, where are those? What are they? And how? And I think we continually do our district plan and our district goals, and we have policy that states our values. So it might not be necessary to state, but when I read it, I thought there is no meaning. There's no clear meaning to support educational goals. It's very broad, and we do have some specifics that specific types of documents, policy and district improvement goals or something, that are indicative of what those educational goals are. And they change and they evolve, so I wouldn't want to be specific, but the kinds of materials where you might find that information might be helpful.
Great.
Those are my only two thoughts.
We will look at those. That's great. Thank you.
That's great. So that moves into the next policy, which is policy BA.
All right, this one should be relatively easy. Again, this one has probably grown very stale. It's hasn't been reviewed since October of 2006. The first one that you see is Hopkinton's, and there are 2 paragraphs there. When you get to policy BA, which is the MASC policy, you have those 2 paragraphs, but then you also have, in accordance with these principles, the technique will involve. And number 1 suggests that the school committee will periodically set performance objectives for the school committee itself and evaluate their accomplishment. So, I mean, essentially, what it's asking you to do is set school committee goals.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, the fundamental difference between what we have currently and MASC.
Any
Well,
comments?
I remember a few years ago, Amanda brought that up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
So it's nice to incorporate it now,
I like
a few years later.
No, I like it.
I feel like it was actually last year, but the time between this year and last year feels like several.
That's right, that's right.
Well, I think, me personally, 3.5 years or 3 years down the line of being on school committee, I have a much better sense of what might be appropriate goals and metrics and things maybe. So, I think this it'll be a challenge for us, but it looks good.
But a good exercise for
Yeah,
us
I
to
think
go through and to be able to then look through. I liked what you did particularly with the end of your report as the chair, to be able to kind of tie that together with looking at
Right.
how we did with what we set out to do for our goals for the year.
Keep us on track.
Keep us, yep.
I can't believe this hasn't been looked at since 2006.
I can't either. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so much, you could just
We
tell by the
found
way
some
it's typed
oldies.
out that it's old.
Right.
We did. Okay, that's great.
You guys are working really hard in policy.
Just sweating while we're doing it.
All right, so that brings us into reports, and the first report we have is the superintendent's report.
Okay, I will zip along, and then Mrs. Rothermick will take over when we get to the portion on the update for the high school project.
I have not driven by that recently.
Yeah, when we hired our social emotional learning director, I took her to each school, so she has actually seen that. Not sure if it's loving the idea of loading or not.
Getting that spinning circle.
Let's try it one more time. We'll try it one more time, and then we'll just go with it this way if it doesn't load. Look at that. Okay, so superintendent's report for Thursday, August 12th, 2021. Just a quick update on the MSBA. 3 reports were submitted on August 2nd. We had online enrollment questionnaires, and while that sounds like it might not be too challenging, they actually require that you find out how many houses have been built and sold, and occupancy permits, and live births, and all kinds of things. So that did take quite a bit of unearthing. Mrs. Rothermick and Georgette Wagar, super helpful in that process. There was an Elmwood School Educational Profile questionnaire that asks a lot about what Elmwood does now and sort of what they value instructionally. And then there were 6 supplemental documents that went along with that, including things like our NEASC report, and so there's quite a few documents that they like to have. The last couple of days, 23 members of the Hopkinton Public Schools admin team spent 2 days working on our school improvement plans and the district improvement plan, and really the focus of that work was teaching and learning, specifically as data drives instructional practice, which you saw in one of my goals tonight, and then some SEL work and diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. So And then I'll just let you take over here.
Okay, so just a quick update on the high school construction. The interior painting and ceiling grids are nearly complete. Fire protection is nearly complete and ready for testing this week. The brick veneer installation is continuing. And once the brick is installed around each window opening, then the windows can be installed. So the second floor windows are likely to be installed as soon as possible, while the upper level brick is still ongoing. And the flooring and cabinets install will be the last task for the interior. So you can see from these pictures, these are the ceiling grids that are installed, and the fire protection lines and the heads will be completed this week. And just as a reminder, fire protection is one of the testing that we need to pass for certificate of occupancy. Painting in all the classrooms and the corridors is nearly complete. The finish electrical work ongoing, including the ceiling hung outlets, wall jacks, and switches, and the lights have been powered. The brick installation, so as the masons brick each facade of the building, they also install the insulation and the precast concrete accent panels to match the existing school aesthetics. And the masons again have bricked up to the second floor window, so the windows will start to be installed on that second floor. And just to give you an idea of the schedule moving forward, so the contractor still is targeting the end of August to complete the interior of the building. The brick veneer, the precast panels will continue through August. Some of this work will be ongoing through September, but now after that, they will work around the school schedule. Site work will occur in September, and again, will work around the school schedule. So by the time our teachers return, it's possible the new classrooms on the second floor will be available, and that really is because we're able to get those windows in. The third floor classroom occupancy will be contingent on those third story windows. And if you look up at the top of the existing structure that it's matching, you'll see all the precast, which are these very large concrete panels. So those have to go up, and the final soffit along with the windows. So that third floor kind of is another large leap, but it'll be nice to get that second story classrooms available for the high school. Great. And again, Mr. Bishop does have a plan for the classes that it will not be ready for once students return.
Thank you.
Do you happen to know which parts of this would enable us to use that other staircase? Last
Right.
year with the
They
stairwells.
will be able to use the staircase.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They just can't occupy the classrooms with no windows.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, it's great for ventilation.
That'd be poor form.
But that stairwell, I would think, is important with
Yes.
the
Yes.
returning students who were remote and whatnot, especially.
Yes, and again, so that gets to the difference between the interior work versus the exterior work.
Yeah.
So the interior really is, very close, right, even right
Yeah.
now, getting through the testing, but opening up that staircase is part of that interior.
Right.
And how is this doing on budget? With its,
We are still trending under budget.
Which is amazing,
It is.
given all what we discussed with regard to the marathon stuff.
True, so
supply
we
issues.
did, even though material took a while to get on site, a lot of that had to do with transportation and trucking, and not necessarily that it didn't exist on the shelf. As we look out into the future, the cost of steel has doubled and tripled, so that does change the forecast for the future. Sure. And hopefully as this starts to level out, those pressures start to come back down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the hope, but we got this one in even though we struggled with labor,
Yeah,
we
Yeah.
got the
Yep.
materials in.
that's good. That's good.
Thank
It's
you.
gonna look great.
I know.
And that's it.
Thank you.
Is that it for you
That's
as
all.
well?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So that moves us into the school committee chair report, and I'm going to start with just warrants 22-001, 22-002, 22-003, and 22-004, all approved and all in the packet. And then payroll warrant S22003 has been approved and is also in your packet. In terms of the listening tour, I know that we have all been through. Now, we did the BIPOC, the single parent and economically disadvantaged families, the LGBTQIA plus, and the English language learners, and had a really, it's been a phenomenal experience. It really has been, people have been coming out. It's been smaller and more intimate, but the conversations have been really authentic, and just, I think when we come forward with a report on kind of what we found out, it will be interesting to go through it all, but it really, people have been tremendous in what they have been willing to share and help us with, and it has been really, truly a highlight for me this summer.
Yes, I've learned so much. I think it's very different talking to people in person than receiving emails.
Yes.
And so I think we have learned so much and been given some good guidance about things we can do in the future.
So, and we have upcoming this Sunday, we have the students on IEPs, 504s, special education.
Yep.
And that, there will be tomorrow a listserv going out with the link for that one, as well as the advanced advanced learners group, which we will be talking with on Tuesday. Yep. So those are the upcoming, and then we have two more left of this round. I do think maybe we'll look at some more of these after we take a little break to get school back going and kind of come back to this model of talking with people. So
Yeah, they've been excellent. I just want to thank the people in the community who have come to join us, because it has been really worthwhile for us to hear what experiences and reflections people in the community have on how things are working or not working. And it's just been great. It's been great to meet, and almost everybody, most of the people I've never met before,
Right.
I've seen, so it's been great to meet new members of the community. And hopefully people will continue to come for the remaining.
that is absolutely the hope. So, this was a great idea. So I thank you for bringing this forward initially, and just keep on keeping on.
That's
So,
right.
in terms of email, we did obviously receive more email between this last meeting and this meeting than we have in some time. Received a great deal of email on masking. About 80% of it was people who were in favor of having mask mandates in the school, either for unvaccinated people, or some were for a mandate across the board. About 20% were really looking for it to be a personal choice, and we did, as discussed during public comment, we had two larger groups represented, one in favor of masking and one opposed to any kind of a mask mandate, with large number of parents. So it is good that we're having engagement from the community, and I expect that we will continue to have engagement over the next week as we move towards making some kind of a policy decision on that. The other thing I did get some email on was the allergy policy, the life-threatening allergy policy. I had a parent reach out to ask about that, because that is something that we are set to review down the road, but it has some things that need to go through first in terms of at the district level with the nursing.
Yes, I'd love for the nurses to take a look at plans and protocols, and then that will better inform the policy decisions that we make, because they really are boots on the ground.
Yep, absolutely. So that's a great thing. I did say the listening tour, I did cover that. On August 18th, there is an event for new families in the district. There will be information, because we've done this before, but not for a couple of years because of last year, coming out for us to be able to attend, as well as the invites going out to the new families in the district. We also have the IBB training with the HTA on the 26th, which is, I believe, 9 to 3. So that's, and then next week, we have been invited to participate in the Boston Marathon Love Letters project, and that's going to be just looking for some pictures and a little bit of video of us to include in that, and that would happen just before our meeting here. And so if anybody who is willing to help with that.
I already did that. I did that on the Pride Parade day.
Oh, good for you. Are you
Yeah.
willing to do it on behalf of the school committee as well? You could
Absolutely.
show up in
I'll
multiple
paint myself again.
multiple
Rainbow
spots.
colors.
So that's fabulous.
Nancy, can I just ask you, you said something about the 18th?
The 18th, I did, what did I say? Oh, yes, the new families, yes.
Do you know what time the new families?
It'll be 5 o'clock, 5 to 7.
Okay, thanks.
Then the other thing, just wanted to circle back to some of the future agenda items that we have had. One of the things I know that had been brought up was, excuse me, the air conditioning in buildings, or the lack of air conditioning in buildings. And that has been passed on for a recommendation for looking at grant money for that.
Okay.
So that, and then the trainings that we had discussed previously, because we didn't have all 5 members here, we're going to push that off so that we can all discuss that.
Okay.
As well as the threshold for financial aid. That's going to be something that we come back to in September. And then as well as grant funding updates.
Okay.
That's all I have for that.
You need a longer piece of paper, Nancy.
I do, but I'm low tech. I like paper. Okay, so does anybody have, oh, I also have, we had discussed having a school committee, and this was in the drive, but I also printed it just in case people prefer hard copies. We had talked about having a list of when things come to the school committee, and this Georgette gave us what she has. If people want to take a look at this, we can kind of come back offline and see.
People, do you mean me and Amanda?
Well, I will forward it on to Joe and Leah as well, but because there are other things that maybe we are aware of that don't kind of come from the higher district level that we want to include in there that we do attend, so.
Okay, great.
Just to
This
have
is really
those.
helpful, the way she put this together.
Yes,
It's
it
very
is.
clear and easy to read.
She, as always, is a tremendous asset to us and to the district, and also to Dr. Kavanaugh. Any liaison reports? It's a quieter time of year for the subcommittees. Okay, so that brings us into items by consensus.
Okay. As superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
motion by Meg, second by Amanda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and that brings us down to a motion for adjournment.
Yes.
So motion by Meg,
Second.
second by Amanda. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that is it for this evening. We are adjourned at 8:52. Thank you all who tuned in, and for those who were able to attend here in person. Our next meeting is next Thursday, August 19th. It will be here at HCAM. I hope everybody has a nice week, and we will see people then.